Hello again everyone and welcome back to the Underground. This is the Intel update for April 6th through the 12th, 2025. It's been a very busy week, like I say all the time nowadays, but in this case I'm afraid that this week has been a swing and a miss on my part, at least from a research perspective, which we'll get to in a moment. Sometimes Intel work is like that. A lot of times you have to do an awful lot of work to come up with a giant pile of nothing or just get stuck at some step along the way. So I'm afraid I've been a little bit preoccupied with some research that hasn't really panned out, so I haven't had much time to dig much into what has happened around the world this week. But let's go ahead and talk about the global strategic concerns right up front. And in the United States this week, the trade war has continued. So lots of ups and downs, not a whole lot to sink our teeth into. We're just going to have to wait and see. When things are chaotic, it's probably a good idea to let things pan out and see how it works. As far as the tariffs go, it looks like most of the tariffs on the rest of the planet from the United States have either been paused for 90 days or they have been reduced to 10% for 90 days while negotiations are ongoing. At the moment, the big tariff conflict appears to be between the United States and China, both of which are digging in. So as things stand right now, the United States has a 145% tariff on Chinese imports, and China has a 125% tariff on American imports. This has obviously amounted to what is essentially a trade embargo between the two nations. This is very obviously not something that is economically sustainable in the long run, so I would expect by this week to have some more information on Chinese-American trade negotiations. More specifically, around the United States, aviation concerns have continued to grow over the past month or so. Since the election, there have been a lot of shakeups at the FAA and various airports around the country regarding personnel and things like that, but the past few weeks have been rather kinetic. For instance, there was a fist fight between air traffic controllers earlier this month in the tower during flight operations in Washington, D.C. This is coupled with a couple of days ago, a couple of aircraft clipped wings in Washington, D.C. There have also been a few high-level retirements. For instance, the chief of all air traffic control doctrine and management announced his retirement earlier this week. So it's a fairly kinetic time. Of course, the media is going to focus on things like the plane crashes and problems with general aviation that are more typical and not really out of the norm. But when it comes to other things like fist fights at airports becoming a huge problem now, even apparently amongst staff, it seems, and other things that are adjacent to the aviation community, these concerns are beginning to mount, and there's been increased scrutiny on the way that air traffic control is handled throughout the country. Moving over to Eastern Europe, the situation with regards to the Ukrainian war continues really without much change. However, this week, the United States and Russia have begun more direct negotiations with regards to how this conflict is going to shake out. This is not really new. The United States and Russia have been working on this for a few weeks now. However, the talks are beginning to become a little bit more high level and a little bit more publicly high level. So this is probably a positive tone for how the Ukrainian war is hopefully going to come to an end. But no real public progress has been made. Sometimes that's the way that it is, and sometimes in the world of diplomacy, no news is good news. So nothing bad has happened so far between the United States and Russia, so that's probably a positive thing for now. Moving down to the Middle East, the strategic buildup continues as before. I know we're tired of hearing about it, but it still continues, and it's still continuing to get more substantial. The grand questions are starting to be asked on the national stage of, is this buildup for Yemen, or is this buildup for Iran, or is this buildup for somewhere else? Who knows? It's really hard to say at this moment, but the buildup does continue. The United States, more specifically, has continued bombing nearly daily in Yemen, and we'll talk about which assets are conducting that bombing here in a moment. But over in Diego Garcia, where we're going to be spending most of our time today again, there have been a lot of indications and warnings of increased logistical efforts, so we'll talk about that in just a moment though. Moving to the strategic movement tracker, our fleet tracker for this week, things have remained very much the same as before. The Nimitz has arrived in the Pacific Theater and is cutting some circles out there in the North Pacific Ocean at the moment. The USS Iwo Jima has been in and out of Port Norfolk for a few days now. I think she's conducting some sort of exercise, probably some follow-on training regarding the exercise a couple of weeks ago. No real indications and warnings of a major deployment, but both the Iwo Jima and the Wasp have been seen moving in and out of Norfolk a little bit more often than is normal, so we'll see how that works out. But either way, they are not a factor. Neither of these flat tops are a factor for what's going on in the Middle East. That is squarely on the Truman and the Carl Vinson. The Truman is in the Red Sea, and the Carl Vinson was observed off the coast of Oman a few hours ago. We don't have an exact location for either of these carrier strike groups, obviously because, operational security. However, aircraft who have been conducting logistics flights to these carrier strike groups have been observed on ADS-B, so we can kind of get a general gist of where they're located, and the Carl Vinson was definitely off the coast of Oman at least a few hours ago. Both of these carriers, their mission is somewhat ambiguous, but it's very, very likely that both of these carriers are conducting strikes in Yemen. We've seen a very sharp increase in at least the Houthis reporting things blowing up, so the CENTCOM has announced various bombing campaigns. The White House has been talking about it quite a lot. It's hard to pin the tail on the donkey as to which carrier is doing which bombings, but that's the kind of situation as it stands for now. Moving down to Diego Garcia, I don't want to hyperfixate on this location too much in the grand scheme, the big picture of things, but I do have a lot of satellite images to cover. I've already bought them, so I might as well talk about them. This image is from the 6th, is probably the best image I have this week of the south parking apron. As we can see, 6 B-2s are still there, 6 tankers are still there, hangars still may or may not have bombers in them, probably empty, but you never know. One of the more interesting images this week came from April 8th. Again, this is a commercial imagery, so please forgive the Looney Tunes-esque distortions on this image. I can't really help it that much. But this image shows that 3 of the B-2s were missing. So 3 B-2s and 3 KC-135 Stratotankers were missing. Now, again, most people might say, alright, fine, they're aircraft. They were off bombing something in Yemen or doing something. However, a little analytical rule of thumb is that when you're looking at satellite imagery from an intelligence perspective and you're trying to figure out what's going on, sometimes the time of day that the image was taken is more valuable than what's in the image. In this case, we have 3 missing bombers and 3 missing tankers. Now, you may say one of 2 things happened. Either one, those bombers are secretly in those hangars, hiding, and they're doing some kind of something on the bombers that they don't want satellites to see. Very good theory, but a more likely theory is that the 3 bombers took off and they took each a tanker with them wherever they went. Now again, time of day matters. This image was taken at 04:43 Zulu time, which works out to be around about 10:45 local time. So middle of the day, more or less, around lunchtime. So this image was taken during the daytime. So what? Well, for one of the main theories as to why these B-2s are here is because of the story, the narrative that's being pushed either by a lot of so-called OSINT pages on Twitter or by the White House or the Pentagon themselves, or everyone is basically saying these B-2s are for Yemen and they're conducting bombings in Yemen. And that may be true. That may be true. However, the Houthis have not reported a single daytime bombing at all. Certainly not with large bombs that are going to be delivered by a B-2. Now, there have been Hellfire strikes here and there from drones. There have been a few sporadic bombings during the daytime. We have footage of this, so we know this has occurred, but the Houthis have mostly reported these very large-scale bombings, the large targeting, the large deliberate targeting, not the dynamic stuff, the deliberate stuff, which is what B-2s are going to be doing. That kind of targeting has taken place during the nighttime, which makes sense. So, if the B-2s are missing during the day, and they're not bombing in Yemen, where are they? Or where did they go? That I cannot speculate on. I do not know. You can make the argument that it was a training flight. That 3 B-2s took off with their tankers and they flew somewhere for training. I don't know why you're going to break multiple world records to land at this place and conduct a forward deployment like you've never done before just to do some localized training. That's not something that B-2s normally do. I don't know. I'm sure there's plenty of theories out there, but I thought it was interesting that it does not make any sense for these bombers to be gone during the daytime if they're conducting bombings in Yemen when no bombings have been reported in Yemen. So that was kind of an interesting tidbit from the April 8th. Also kind of interesting, as we can see, there are 2 C-5 Galaxies sitting on the runway. And just to show my homework a little bit, you can 1000% say that these are in fact C-5s and not C-17s, as many people have claimed. These are C-5s because I can load this satellite imagery into ArcGIS and do what's called point mensuration. Basically, I can measure things with a very, very good accuracy, and if I were to use my measuring tool here to measure the wingspan of whatever aircraft is on the runway, I can compare that to what the U.S. Air Force says is the wingspan of a C-5 Galaxy, and in this case, I'm off by a couple of meters. So with a resolution, image resolution of 1 meter, I'm off by 2 pixels, so sorry about that. But either way, pretty close. So we can say with a pretty good certainty that these are 2 C-5s sitting here delivering cargo to Diego Garcia. So pretty interesting stuff. Other images I already got this week are from April 9th. Again, the analyst's nightmare of clouds over the target. This has been the bane of existence for most military analysts who look at imagery since World War II, and it's still the same today. I can't afford a synthetic aperture radar image to punch through these clouds, and a lot of the satellite images services that we can buy images from commercially, they don't have infrared either, so it doesn't help us out too much, but we can still see a handful of B-2s peeking through the clouds. And the next day, we also have a free satellite shot. Sentinel-2 imagery from April 10th confirms that all 6 bombers are back at base along with their respective stratotankers, and we do have one C-5 parked on the runway as well. One of the interesting notes from this image is that one of the B-2s appears to be maneuvering, so either she's just taxiing around, testing something, maintenance checks, whatever, or she's returning or departing. Either way, kind of an interesting image, even if it is a low-quality rendering. Now, one of the things that we have to be mindful of when it comes to looking at runways and blurry images of aircraft is hyperfixation. A lot of people are looking at this island, and a lot of people are looking at this parking apron here. And the U.S. government knows, the Pentagon, and whoever federal agencies are watching this video right now certainly know that people like me are watching this to get a feel for, basically, or if we're going to go to war or not. And because the national intelligence agencies are watching this, they may be inclined, and the forces at this island may be inclined to pull a little bit of a sneaky. So, while we're looking down here at the south apron, it's easy to forget that this isn't the only parking area on this airfield. There is a north apron, so I did get a shot of the north apron just to confirm. I already had a hunch, but I did get an image to confirm that no, there is nothing going on at the north parking apron. This is an unused portion of the base normally, but I would have expected maybe a C-5 or C-17 to park here if the south apron gets a little bit full. So if we start to see more strategic assets start to stage here, we'll have to keep an eye on the north apron too. But for now, the situation here is NISTR, or nothing significant to report, a giant fat nothing. And even though nothing is occurring at this part of the airbase, this is a good reminder to avoid slipping into the analytical trap of failing to zoom out. And zoom out this week I did. If we were to go back to our Sentinel imagery and zoom out quite a bit, there have not just been aviation concerns this week, but also maritime concerns. So even though you guys have not seen this work, I have been tracking the ships as they have been coming and going from Diego Garcia, simply because I'm interested to see if this location is starting to be used more as a jumping off point for very long-term military operations. And unfortunately, my research has been rather inconclusive this week. I did find 2 unidentified vessels that seem to be rather new to me over the past few weeks or so, and I will share with you some of my homework in trying to identify these vessels. So one of the reasons we may want to be mindful of this is, again, taking a more holistic approach. Just tracking B-2s, as cool as it is, and looking at these very, very expensive aircraft on satellite imagery is interesting. If we're trying to get a much more bigger picture of things, you're not going to be able to fly in enough bombs on a C-5 or C-17 to sustain a long-term bombing campaign, right? You're going to need ships, and in this case, these 2 ships caught my eye. Now, before we jump into what these 2 vessels are and their true identities, I had to jump back in here after I have recorded this brief, I have edited it, I have even uploaded it. It's all good to go, and in classic fashion, the very minute that I finished the upload for this briefing today here on Sunday, April 12th, I have identified this vessel. So in short, all of what I'm about to talk about, highlighting my thought processes and all the images and all of the analysis work on my end, all of this is kind of irrelevant now, so if you want to skip past it, please feel free to do so. But I wanted to leave it in to show you some of the things that I think about and the things I was working toward. And if you want to, you can actually see some of the analytical mistakes that I made going through this, some key assumptions right up front that actually are very, very inaccurate. Now, I did start off with this sort of okay, but it really did kind of bug me that some of the data points that I identified never really sat quite right. Anyway, I'll start to go through my process now and kind of jump back and show you what I was thinking, and then I'll cut back in at the end and tell you exactly what this vessel is, because it's not a supply vessel. Well, technically it is, but not really. Anyway, we'll get to that in a moment. But for now, here's what I started with. Now, the first one, which we'll call composite tanker number 1, this was very obviously a tanker of some kind, completely normal, nothing out of the ordinary. It doesn't seem to have visited this location very often, at least based on my limited research, but it's still going to be delivering fuel, probably for the aircraft at this base, maybe oil too, who knows. Probably a variety of petroleum products, to be honest. Either way, we've got a pretty good jumping off point for what vessel that is. The other vessel is a rather unique one. This is very obviously a supply vessel, an auxiliary. And to me, personally, it looks like a Lewis and Clark class dry goods auxiliary. That's generally what they're called. Now, I scrolled back through all of the Sentinel imagery and found out when she arrived at this location. That's a pretty good place to start from. When did she get there? That maybe help us figure out which vessel it is. And it appears to have arrived between March 11th and March 18th. Some people claimed that she is the USNS Guadalupe on social media. We'll get to that in a moment. But overall, my point mensuration for this time for this vessel is that she's approximately 213 to 215 meters, at least from my rather garbage imagery. So I'll show you that now. One of the reasons I don't think she's the Guadalupe, even though that's what's being claimed right now, is that her whole configuration looks different. Guadalupe's got a pointy bow, and this one has a rather blunted beak, so to speak. It just doesn't look the same. The forecastle on the Guadalupe is rather large as well. Doesn't really match. However, if we look at a Lewis and Clark class auxiliary, it looks very similar to that. It looks like the small forecastle there and the squared off portion of the bow looks a little bit more accurate. And we can even go a little bit further, go to Norfolk Naval Station, our favorite naval base for getting top-down imagery of U.S. Navy auxiliary ships. And we look at a Henry J. Kaiser class replenishment oiler and our satellite image of our vessel that's in the harbor at Diego Garcia. And you can see it doesn't really match. It's not the same vessel. However, it does look a lot more like a Lewis and Clark class dry cargo or ammunition ship, right? So, this is generally the kind of back pocket research that most of you will never see, but it's being done in the background anyway. I just thought I would share this time around. So again, I got multiple images of these vessels throughout the week, and I was really kind of interested to find out what is the name of this auxiliary ship here. And I got way down into the weeds by creating a table of every single Lewis and Clark class auxiliary ship, with the goal of finding out through process of elimination which vessel this could be. Again, there are easier ways of doing this, but I wanted to do the hard work this time around. This is some kind of like junior level intel guy stuff, so I wanted to do this work just to build familiarity with where these vessels are located normally, and through my own work I was able to basically narrow down which vessel this could be. If it is a Lewis and Clark class auxiliary, it's got to be one of these three, because all the ones in red here, it obviously can't be those ships. So I thought, well, none of these were really good fits either, so I thought, well, maybe it's not a Lewis and Clark, but I measured multiple times from multiple images, and the measurements I was getting are not the best. I mean, it could be a lot of different things. I think probably the image from April 5th is the best image I could get of this particular vessel, but again, not really conclusive. It does look like a Lewis and Clark class, but it may not be. The tanker seems a little bit more clear in this image from April 5th, so the claims that this is the tanker Stena Imperative, that does kind of match. The Stena line of oilers, or tankers, those are very impossible to tell apart on satellite imagery. The only way to tell these apart is, again, by AIS and by really good imagery, much better imagery than we can get from a satellite. So I did work through, just to show my work, one of the classic ways that we track and categorize ships since World War II. So believe it or not, the U.S. Navy, specifically the Office of Naval Intelligence, still does do this by hand. They classify the hull configuration and what we call the upright sequence. This is done by hand still to this day. So I pulled the upright sequence for the Stena Imperative. I found a side shot of the Stena Imperative, and I did the upright sequence myself. Now, again, this is really nerdy stuff. It doesn't really help you that much, but this is kind of an interesting little bit of Navy lore. This goes back again to the days of World War II, when, imagine you're a submarine captain in the North Atlantic, you're hunting merchants, and you need to know which merchant you sink, right? How do you, for instance, on all those History Channel documentaries, how do we know the gross tonnage of vessels that were sunk. Well, I'll tell you how we know. The submarine captain looked through his periscope and conducted an analysis of the upright sequence of whichever ship he was getting ready to shoot a torpedo at, and from that upright sequence we could then determine what ship it was, especially if it's in the dark. All you see is a silhouette, and you see masts and funnels and cranes, and you can categorize the hull shape and superstructure. Well, if you've got a big database, or in many cases just a book, on board the ship of which vessel it is, you can generally kind of put two and two together as to which submarine sank which ship, and that research combined with the losses, for instance, during the Battle of the Atlantic, the losses on the Allied side, which ship was sunk, at which location and on what day, you can narrow down and figure out which ship it is. But this doctrine carries forward to today. So determining the upright sequence for commercial ships is very, very important when it comes to trying to identify commercial merchant vessels. And in this case, it's a little bit subjective, but I did the upright sequence as mast, crane, funnel, crane, just identifying the features you can see. Again, we're looking for big features on board the ship. There's a little bit of room for debate. Modern ships are not like World War II ships. So, for instance, in this particular image, the analyst could make the argument that second mast there is a king post. But in any case, this is generally what we're going with. And if we also do the same thing with the hull configuration, in this case, it is a raised one hull configuration. Some might argue it's a flushed hull. Either way, it's just more data in our pocket. It doesn't really matter because the upright sequence and the hull configuration for our ship that we see here in the imagery matches pretty good. So we're going to say with a fairly high confidence this is probably the Stena Imperative as claimed. Again, World War II, we've made a lot of development since then, and we have really overly watermarked drone shots of some of these vessels as well, and we can compare that to the open source Sentinel imagery, and we can compare it to the image, the paid commercial image, and it seems to match pretty dang close. So as far as the tanker goes, yeah, it's the Stena Imperative most likely. We can also check the AIS data. Again, some of you may say, well, why didn't you check the AIS tracking data? I did. Almost all vessels shut off their transponder before they get within 1,000 miles of this island. Again, it's a very decently secret place, and there is an AIS transponder or receiver here, and none of the vessels who go to this island turn their transponder on, so it's very much a kind of a blacked out place, which is understandable considering it's largely military use. So that's kind of where I'm stuck at here. One of the reasons why I can't identify this vessel is there are a few theories here, which you can read on your own. It could be that I'm just stupid and am missing something completely. This could be a standard thing, that maybe this isn't a buildup of resources at Diego Garcia. I went through and I looked through the past 4 years of Sentinel images. Every single time an image was taken, I looked at it, and from my own eye, I can't really, there are routine logistics shipments to this island, but I can't determine right now. I don't have enough data to determine if what I'm seeing in this image, for instance, is anything abnormal. So maybe it's not abnormal. I don't know. Another thing to remember is maybe I'm just misidentifying this vessel. Maybe it could be something else. Maybe it's a foreign vessel. Who knows? I measured it. I did all this point mensuration on it, and it matches as best I can to a Lewis and Clark class auxiliary. Another theory is that, well, maybe the Sentinel imagery is misleading. Maybe they're trying to pull a sneaky on us. Again, coming back to the military deception possibility, here are the past few images where I think this vessel arrived at this location and anchored in this spot. And as you can see, based on the kind of yellow-orange circles, it's been there since at least March 18th. Now, there was a gap of time between March 11 and March 18 where there was no satellite coverage, so she arrived somewhere between 11 and 18. But maybe she didn't. Maybe that's a different vessel. It's pretty cloudy, so maybe she really arrived on the 31st. There's no telling. Maybe they're trying to play a shell game here and telling different commercial ships to anchor in the same spot to make it look like it's been one single ship this entire time, when in actuality it's been multiple ships. That's a possibility too. I say that because if we go back to my chart here of who it could possibly be, based on the images, well, we've got our three contenders. You can see the dates here. The dates are not matching up, so something is wrong along here. It's far more likely that I'm just wrong and that I have done something incorrectly up until this stage than it is for a sort of ghost ship to exist. Ships don't just, appear, right? So All right, just to save everyone some time in the comment section down below, I can confirm 100% that I was wrong. This is not a Lewis and Clark class dry cargo ship. The entire internet is wrong as well. Twitter is wrong. All of the multi-million-dollar think tanks and probably CIA-funded naval warfare publications are also incorrect. I have figured out what this ship is. This vessel is the USS Emory S. Land, AS-39. And some of you out there may say, what in the Sam Hill kind of vessel is that? Well, my friends, this is a submarine tender. I would like to state for the record that I'm not entirely at fault here, okay? Because this ship is not supposed to be here. So the Emory S. Land is one of 2 ships left of her type in the entire U.S. Navy fleet. There is the USS Emory S. Land and the USS Frank Cable. Like I mentioned earlier, it didn't really make a whole lot of sense. There was something a little bit nagging to me about this vessel being called something that it wasn't right to start with, and then the actual AIS data indicated that, well, it can't really be a Lewis and Clark vessel either. The imagery is kind of bad, but it's almost the same dimensions as a Lewis and Clark vessel. However, what I was measuring is the helipad off the rear end, and if you'll see at the very, very top image, the satellite image that I bought here shows a cutout in the helipad, so it's like an offset helipad, and that was the thing that kind of got me going to think, maybe this is not a Lewis and Clark class vessel, because they have a helipad that's obviously contained within the hull, and it just looks different. So anyway, I kind of had an epiphany. It came to me that this is actually a submarine tender, the USS Emory S. Land, and that's definitely what it is. If you look at all the images you can Google on your own, it's definitely what it is. Now, for those of you who feel a little bit charitable with wasting your time for the past few minutes, this is still very important. So I was originally concerned about this ship coming to this area to deliver bombs. Well, we know that's not the case now. This ship is here to take care of submarines. This is a submarine tender. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the U.S. Navy is going to be running attack subs out of Diego Garcia now. Now, the more astute of you, if you research the USS Emory S. Land and the submarine tender class of ships, you may find that, wow, wait a minute, she's been here before. And you would be correct. The USS Emory S. Land was stationed in Diego Garcia almost 15 years ago. That's a long time, right? Now, here's the kicker with this. There's only 2 of these vessels left, the Emory S. Land and the Frank Cable. Now, the Frank Cable is supposed to be stationed in Guam, and the Emory S. Land is supposed to be stationed here in Diego Garcia. Now, here's the kicker. I've got a lot of documentations that state that this ship, the Emory S. Land, was actually transferred to Guam, and the Frank Cable was sent to the west coast of America, back to Seattle, right? So, quite the twist of fate, isn't it? It's not exactly what we were talking about, but in unraveling this mystery of what this ship is, we've actually uncovered something rather new. That's why I couldn't find this ship going back a little ways in the imagery, because, well, she wasn't there. She was in Guam. And now, at least as of a few months ago, maybe even a couple of years, she's been stationed here in Diego Garcia a little bit more permanently. So, how long has she been at Diego Garcia? I don't know, because my Sentinel imagery is not that great. During the winter time, there are sometimes many months where I can't get a good image of anything because of cloud cover. So again, I've gone through years and years and years of this area worth of imagery, and I can't find this ship here past a few months ago. So when she got here in probably in the middle of March, like I had originally theorized, between March 11th and March 18th. So I don't know. You guys tell me. What do you think? This is kind of interesting. No, it's not the ship we were expecting it to be, but it is very, very interesting in a completely different manner. So once again, not particularly new. This is rather old information, to be honest, but I think it's kind of interesting, and it does highlight that we're looking at militarizing Diego Garcia a little bit more often, because otherwise, why would she be here, right? Again, an island in the middle of the Indian Ocean is very helpful for running submarines out of the Middle East, so that, the submarines that are accompanying the carrier strike groups don't have to wait so long without going with mail and things like that. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know if this is a smoking gun that points to, holy cow, we're going to be having more submarine operations out of Diego Garcia. I don't know. This may be the same baseline, so it doesn't really help us make any more decisions about the seriousness of what's going on at Diego Garcia, but it is very, very interesting, and I found it to be quite the thrilling hunt to find out what this vessel is. So either way, this is kind of the research that I have done this week. These are the facts that we can sink our teeth into, and unfortunately, this does highlight the difference between journalism and intelligence. If we were to just talk about just the raw facts, hey, there's 2 ships in the harbor, right? And we don't go into the analysis of what that means, or we don't do any of the research to determine what vessel it could be. We're not going to highlight any of these discrepancies. So the world of intelligence is, of course, different from the world of journalism. Journalism is supposed to tell you just the facts, whereas intelligence is supposed to help you make decisions based on incomplete information. And in this case, there's a lot of incomplete information. Sometimes that happens, but either way, it is a very good week for learning lessons and kind of getting back to the basics of good intel habits to have. Don't hyperfixate on one thing. I know I've hyperfixated on these ships this week, but don't focus on just the aircraft. Don't focus on just this island. This island doesn't really matter that much in the grand scheme of things. It's all little breadcrumbs of information we're trying to put together. It's like a paint by numbers thing. We're trying to paint a picture here, but we've only got like 2 colors, and we can only fill in 30% of the spots on the painting. So not going to be a very pretty picture, and you may have to still look at that picture and make a decision. That's kind of what this is all about. Showing my homework to detail some of the more in-depth things that we talk about and work through, and some of the conclusions we have to come to based on very, very incomplete and oftentimes conflicting information. So I know, not very interesting, very, very boring, but that's what I have for this week. That's pretty much all I've been able to focus on and work through with regards to what's going on around the Middle East. Now, I do have a couple of things I'm not going to talk about just yet. I do have a couple of other locations. I have not, as you might be led to believe by what I've talked about so far, I have not been focusing only on Diego Garcia. There are a few other places to watch, and watching them I have been. So I will hope to have a little bit more information. We have to start developing these things out. We've got to start somewhere, right? So I'll hope to hopefully have a little bit more information on that over the next month. It's going to take a while for my work to come to fruition on this, to kind of figure out, are we going to war with Iran or not? Or are we doing something else? But either way, wrapping up today with the Intercepted GhostNet Reports. It's been a pretty light week this week, which is kind of understandable. This time of year, it's always pretty light. Everybody wants to be outdoors and not playing with radio stuff. But that's the eternal battle, isn't it? It's always a challenge to keep from being complacent. And we most certainly have to remember to not get complacent. Make sure you know how to use your stuff. Make sure you have a plan for communicating with people you need to communicate with if and when communications goes down. We still have to remember submarine cables are still being cut. China is still tapping or trying to manipulate or cut or anchor drag over cables all of the time. It's become a very common thing to do. So again, don't be complacent. Realize that the internet may go out for certain parts of the world, and it may be hard to figure out what's going on. So as we all know, you cannot really easily create a communications plan after a disaster. You kind of have to plan on what you're going to do beforehand, and the GhostNet is at least a stopgap measure in that regard. So that's all I have for today. Here are the sources as usual, and thank you guys all for sticking with me today. I know it's been kind of a whole lot of nothing this week, even though there have been definitely a lot of things going on. It's just not a whole lot of conclusive activities that we can kind of really get any sort of closure on, I guess. But either way, I'm going to continue keeping a very broad view on things, and we'll see what next week brings. Hopefully we'll have some more information there. But until then, thank you for all of your support. It really helps when I've got to go through a lot of satellite images, and it really helps a lot too in keeping the mapping project I've got going. So that definitely does help quite a bit. So thank you all for that, and I will see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.